I think I consider this an honor and privilege to be invited to speak to such an esteemed audience. I'm going to read out my presentation. I'm just putting one picture up for you to look at. Okay. Okay, the first thing, I would like to begin by giving two examples, one personal and the other general. The first, I was waiting in the dentist's reception one day when a little boy of 7 years sat next to me, looking very forlorn. I knew that he was scared to show his teeth to the dentist, and so I decided to distract him. There were some crayons and sheets of paper in one corner. I asked him to bring me the sheets of paper, and I started drawing a cartoon for him. My plan was to ask him to color in the figure that I was drawing. Instead, to my delight, he started copying my lines. I slowed down so that he could follow my pattern, and we ended up with two sketches, with his sketch a near perfect copy of what I had drawn. He was an Oshiwambo child and did not understand English too well, but we connected. His father was deeply grateful to me for keeping his son engaged during the ordeal of waiting for the dentist's chair. He proceeded to fill in the colors and showed his picture to me very proudly before waving me goodbye. The second, exactly 1 week ago, on 15th of August, India celebrated its 70th Independence Day. As part of the Independence Day celebration, nearly 100,000 children from 96 schools all over the country were invited to take part in a competition with the theme, "Our soldiers protect our borders to keep them safe." They had to draw, paint, color a picture based on this theme. 12 children's paintings were selected based on creativity, use of colors and texture, and finally the message. These children were taken to the Wagah border between India and Pakistan to celebrate their Independence Day. On this day, they met the soldiers and drew cards for them, for their families, to express their gratitude to these brave men who protect our country, saving their lives, sacrificing their lives in time with their own families. The event was supported by some of the largest crayon coloring, pencils, and felt pen companies, manufacturing companies in India. For the company, it was an event they could support as part of their corporate social responsibility. And it was an amazing marketing strategy, since all the 96 schools bought their products. For the children, it was an occasion to display their talent in arts and share their creativity with the soldiers. And finally, for the soldiers, it was an occasion for celebration of their sacrifice and the great pride that they had in their job. All three sentiments were crystallized on Independence Day. And one of the pictures that was put up, that was selected, is the one that I put up now. This is one of the pictures, and you can see it's quite simple, actually. It's got a heart. And then, of course, you've got some very traditional Indian symbols. You have the elephant, you have the Sikh with the beard, you have the Taj Mahal in the background, and you have certain Hindu symbols, the Om, and you have the cow, which is such an important Hindu symbol, and also you have the instruments which are typically Indian. And of course, this has to do with our culture, and of course, it is art. Both examples, the personal example and this one, both examples illustrate what is well known and vital about art, but is neglected. The relevance of arts to the holistic development of the child and the importance of art education, not only for all children, but for the creation of an industry which is viable economically and commercially for the country. This, then, is my topic: strengthening arts education for the growth of the creative economy. In my presentation today, I'm going to speak on three important aspects, which I believe are integral to my theme. I hope to be able to raise some questions and suggest some answers. But at the same time, I also wish to problematize art education in order to examine it more critically. In other words, I would like to challenge your thoughts towards reconceptualizing arts and art education. The narrative turn of my presentation will proceed from arts in Africa in general to arts education, and then move towards a more decolonial approach to art education. and why it is necessary that we decolonize art. I draw from my own background in post-colonial literature and critical theory, which suggests ways of addressing literary forms. I wish to extend my argument from literary studies in Namibia to embrace the arts as well, because they fall into a general category of liberal arts. I will also discuss the points of convergence and the points of divergence in order to lay bare the epistemological differences between the art forms and how this is vital to our understanding of what we need to do in order to ensure that art education will eventually contribute to a robust growth in the economy. I begin with the notion of the narrative, which is common to all art forms and is at all levels. The narrative has become a multifaceted object of inquiry in the past few decades, attracting the attention of a variety of disciplines and subject areas. While the narrative traditionally means literary narrative, I would like to propose a wider signification to this term to include all kinds of narrative beyond what is its original meaning. The theoretical frameworks developed to analyze narratives have expanded to include narratives across various media, such as film, TV broadcasts, comics, graphic novels, which is my latest interest. I would like to argue for the inclusion of art forms as well in narratives. What does a painting, a dance, drama, sketch, or even music do but tell a story? Human beings are narrative animals, Homo fabulans, the tellers and interpreters of narratives. We tell stories in different ways, through pictures, through movies, around the fire, through enactment, through music, and through dance. It is possible to read Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare as a text, a comic book, watch a play, witness its conversion into a TV series or a movie, or as an opera or a ballet. According to Turner, and I quote, "Narrative imagining, which is the story, is the fundamental instrument of thought. It is a literary capacity indispensable to human cognition generally." Barthes, again a very important French prose structuralist, notes the universality of the form and lists many sites where it can be found. Narratives are found in myths, legends, tales, novellas, and he goes on, and includes stained glass windows, cinema, comics, news items, conversations. Moreover, under this immense diversity of forms, narrative is present in every age, in every place, in every society. It begins with the history of mankind, and there is nowhere nor has been a people without narrative. It is simply like life itself. Narratives are therefore not only fundamental in education, but to thought itself. Further, narratives are essential to every aspect of life. If we equate narratives to art form, we realize that on the African continent, both narrative and art are as old as life itself. The rock paintings in the Brandenburg Plateau tell a story of the prehistoric man who attempted to record his experiences in a pictorial form. Art was not just a medium to inscribe what happened in his daily existence. It was his way of grappling with the unknowable and trying to make sense of an alien world in which he lived. It is a paradox that even though it is generally acknowledged that African people are creative, citing a long history of unique and distinctive cultural artifacts and performances which are praised all over the globe, art education is neglected in Africa, leading to an abandonment of the art industry. African art and crafts, film, music, textile, architectural designs, among others, have the potential of telling the African story, if only they were competitive enough. As it has been argued in the past, the skills and training that could bring economic benefits to the artists as well as the society are declining owing to marginalization brought about by globalization, which has undermined the creativity of traditional societies. While at one level, modernization has many positive impacts on people, it has also had a negative impact on African societies. It has tended to destroy local creativity and subjugated local people to Eurocentric and westernized ethos. Reviving the art industry is not only crucial for the modern society, but could also promote economic growth and contribute to poverty reduction in the region. In the past 15 years, a narrative turn has been identified in politics, law, medicine, and even cognitive sciences. In a postmodern society, Lyotard, again a great critic, emphasizes that grand narratives, within quotes, were written by capitalized history. In order to challenge the significant changes brought about by the imposition of colonial forces, there is a need to incorporate art in the education system because it teaches us to contest the grand narrative and excavate hidden chronicles. It is for us to tell stories that are occluded from history. This is what is meant by decoloniality and decolonization. And for me, a significant moment in our attempt to strengthen art education. And decoloniality, if you remember, and I'm speaking particularly to my friend here, who talks about Chinua Achebe, one of the earliest critics to talk about decoloniality was Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who has written Decolonizing the Mind. Now I'm going to move on to talk about the importance of art education. Realizing the importance of art education in 2006, the Lisbon Conference on Art Education was organized by UNESCO to achieve feasible results by addressing the following four main themes, namely, advocacy for arts education, stressing the importance of cultural diversity in arts education and sustainable development. Number 2, the impact of arts education. Number 3, strategies for promoting arts education policies. And finally, teacher training. The first keynote address in the conference emphasized the importance of inclusion of arts and humanities in an art education system that gave primacy of place to science, technology, and mathematics. I come from a university of science and technology. There's always a lot of talk about science and technology, and nobody realizes the importance of humanities and human sciences. Rapid developments in science and technology bring about remarkable changes in individual behavior, with profound social consequences such as conflict, depression, and unrest. In order to cultivate and train skilled, knowledgeable, and innovative citizenry, it is imperative to invest in arts education. Further, this kind of education would also create responsible and moral citizens with an emotional intelligence not taken cognizance of in science education. The second keynote address pointed out that 3 core objectives of education should be ways of living together, cultivating self-identity, and fostering mutual understanding. For these 3 objectives, personal capability, confidence, and creativity would be key factors. All over the world, education systems are based on a hierarchy in which at the top are languages and mathematics, then humanities, and finally, arts at the bottom of priorities. And among the arts, art and music are better provided for than dance and drama. The third keynote address of the UNESCO conference drew on philosophical ideas of Plato and reminded the conference that a conception of society implies not only a search for truth, of abundance and good, but it is also based on the pursuit of beauty and pleasure. At a time when cultural consumption is becoming ordinary and art, decoration, and amusement boundaries are dissolving, critical thinking is more necessary than ever. The Lisbon Conference demonstrated the value of arts education, affirming the need to build creative capabilities in young people and to advocate arts education in all societies. One important focus was the implementation of art education programs for people from disadvantaged social backgrounds and also people with disabilities. The Second World Conference on Art Education took place in 2011. As a product of the UNESCO Second World Conference on Arts Education, the sole agenda was intended to build on the UNESCO roadmap for arts education that was a major outcome of the First World Conference held in Lisbon in 2006. The roadmap offered an important theoretical and practical framework that provided guidance for advancing the qualitative development and growth of arts education. The central goal of the Seoul Conference was to reassess and encourage further implementation of the roadmap. The Seoul Agenda served as a concrete plan of action that integrates the substance of the roadmap within the structure of 3 broad goals, each accompanied by a number of practical strategies and specific action items. I'm not going to read out all the practical strategies and the specific items because it will take me the whole day, but I will mention the 3 goals. Goal 1, Ensure that arts education is accessible as a fundamental and sustainable component of a high-quality renewal of education. Goal 2, assure that arts education activities and programs are of high quality in conception and delivery. And Goal 3, apply arts education principles and practices to contribute to resolving the social and cultural challenges facing today's world. The Seoul Conference stated that arts education needs to be included in curricula at an early age in order to best address the issues raised. There was a study which looked at creativity across all ages, and you realize that small children up to the age of 10, have got 98% creativity. As they grow older, by the time they reach the age of 18, that 98% has dropped to 15%. And as adults, it drops to 2%. Why don't we introduce arts education right there at primary level? Okay, Seoul Conference stated that arts education needed to be included in curricula at an early age in order to best address the issues raised. In that respect, the issues of nurturing a creative and innovative workforce, promoting and conserving identity and heritage, as well as fostering social responsibility and combating school dropout rates were points that emerged across all regions as co-contributions to quality arts education. I move on to talk about empowering students to be creative. The significance of art in the development of a child cannot be underestimated. It is through art that a child is able to understand and clearly arrive at meanings of their surroundings. It is a well-known fact that students perform better using visuals and illustrations to learn than those who learn without them. In addition to enabling students to understand better, art education also stimulates children to discover their talents through such exposure. Art endows people with a sense of identity and self-reliance. It enables them to express themselves and connect with others, thereby becoming tools of communication. Artists have the ability to critique societies through their art, as Shakespeare says, hold up a mirror to nature, as it were, so that it can see its own ugly reality. Art can contribute to building and perpetuating social, religious, political, and economic stability of a society. As Ename, a Nigerian critic, argues that art should be given importance like other subjects in school curriculum. It should reflect a study of all ages and cultures and how they relate to the development of individuals. Art helps students to advance necessary imaginative, intellectual, theoretical, and practical skills important enough to equip them for continuing social development and professionalism. Further, art enables students to think outside the box and develop new and innovative ideas which are vital in industries and organizations. There was a study which was done of Google and the people who are employed there, and you'll be surprised to learn that only about 20 to 25% in Google are from the field of science and technology. So that's an eye-opener. The ministry should commit to make an impact on economic growth, development and tourism through targeting development of cultural industries which are organized around the production and consumption of culture and related services, and investing in an infrastructure for arts, culture, and heritage education. Educators and educational institutions should be identified as part of the mechanism of reconceptualizing the arts. Since education was used to deny the values of the other cultures, it should now be used to redress that injustice. We talked about social justice. It is expected to build a sense of pride in our diverse cultural heritage, diversity. It is an opportunity to decolonize art education and focus on local and regional needs. What are the challenges to art education? Many parents are reluctant to send their wards to art classes because they believe that it is too expensive on the one hand, and on the other hand, dissuade their children from studying art because they think that it will not be possible to earn a living with art education. There is a negative perception about art that it is for lazy people. The curriculum of arts education does not take cognizance of the epistemological and the ontological differences among the different art forms influencing the pedagogy of art teaching, training, and skills development. Drama practitioners approach their art form in a very different way, and I can see Sandy Rudd here, in a very different way from how a visual arts teacher conveys concept, ideas, and structures in a subject. Further, this is also complicated by the fact that there are different ethnic identities jostling for space within the constraints of a fixed curriculum. We have this discussion at NUST. Do we have space to teach the local languages? But because of the constraints of money, we say, no, we're going to teach only English. Is that right? Is that fair? I leave you with that question. Market-based models of education and the neoliberal rationalization policies seem at odds with the social justice agenda of a democratic state. Many believe that only those subjects should be taught for which there is tangible evidence which is market-related. Market-friendly policies are linked to human capital theory, which holds that improving education which will lead to economic growth. But human capital theory is often applied in a manner which ignores the history, social struggles, and other interrelated factors that can comprise an art education. The departments of fine arts, music, drama, and languages are closed down as cost-saving measures because they are not economically viable. This raises a number of questions regarding the perception of the role of arts in the humanities and indeed the economic viability of all small specialist disciplines within universities and other educational institutions. Now I move on to talk about developing policies to improve art education. As mentioned earlier, in a bid to avail strategic guidance for promoting qualitative development and growth in arts education, UNESCO hosted the first and the second conference, which I mentioned earlier. And these conferences provided a unique platform for Africans to devise and implement appropriate policies, strategies, and concrete actions as a response to the needs and opportunities of the 21st century. From these international cultural policy instruments to which many African countries subscribe, as well as the African policies and plans created by Africans themselves under the auspices of the African Union, the need for arts education is clear. This is decolonization, and it contributes towards nationhood. As such, it should be prioritized in every country's development goals. This brings us to the notion of what is nation, which is crucial in this debate. And Bhabha, I draw from critical theory, the nation fills the void left in the uprooting of communities. Bhabha reconsiders nationalism, representation, and resistance, and stresses that the ambivalence of hybridity, that's his term, that characterizes the site of colonial contestation, which he describes as a liminal space, in which cultural differences articulate and produce imagined constructions of cultural and national identity. For Bhabha, nations are narrative constructions that arise from the hybrid interaction of contending cultural constituencies. We must accept the notion that all cultural traditions are mixed and affected by other cultures. Bhabha states, and I quote, "Once the liminality of the nation space is established and its signifying difference is turned from the boundary outside to its finitude within, the threat of cultural difference is no longer a problem of other people. It becomes a question of otherness of the people as one. How do we Namibians come together and talk about art education which is inclusive?" Culture is thus conceptualized as inclusive, giving voice to the dispossessed and disposed and marginalized, and narrating an imagined national identity. Further, in seeking to mediate the acculturative process, the curriculum policy will have to acknowledge the dynamics of culture formation and raise questions of who and how cultures are shaped. Diouf, in his analysis of how African national projects have failed the youth, draws attention to the socialization of youth and warns that those who are excluded from the arenas of power, work, education, and leisure will construct new sociabilities to show their difference and no longer represent a national priority. I've come to my conclusion now, and I make a few recommendations. Art in education is a very important part of our educational system. Therefore, it should be given adequate representation and consideration. The subject should be introduced at all levels, in all schools, and it should be compulsory. Improvisation of local materials is necessary and will lessen the monetary burden on parents. It's so important that we use local materials. Schools should be able to train pupils' artistic creativity and experience to utilize local materials and tools. This can stimulate creative interest and the power of imagination. What did we say about necessity being the mother of innovation, right? Art materials can be supplied to students free by schools as motivation to explore the subject. Exhibitions, conferences, seminars, and workshops should be organized for exchange of ideas and awareness. When art conferences, seminars, and workshops are organized, participants hear and learn more about art, which will arouse new interest in art or create new knowledge in art activities. In order to achieve results, tertiary institutions that offer art should do so with an ultimate goal of producing creative artists to sustain and revive art education. The National Arts Council in Namibia should carry out their objectives, which among others includes to protect and promote Namibian artistic heritage by fostering the understanding and appreciation of arts in Namibia, by upholding a high standard of efficiency in art and defending the moral and material interests of artists in Namibia. The government should develop policy guidelines in favor of art education. The subject should be mainstreamed. We talked about mainstreaming. The subject should be mainstreamed in all primary and secondary schools. There should be a close monitoring of arts and the pedagogy of art education in schools. We were just talking about this. My neighbor was telling me that there are policies to introduce art education in the schools, but the implementation has not happened. The curriculum for fine arts should be structured in such a way that pupils will enjoy their classes by including participatory activities in arts to make it easily accessible. We must observe that arts have a key role to play in the growth and development of the Namibian economy and therefore need to remain critical in the developmental process. This means that our government needs to effectively render their commitment to arts and to enable the sector to achieve its roles. Educational policy should be adopted as guidelines to developing art education, and the Ministry of Education and all stakeholders should adopt workable policies which will revive the arts education sector. Arts will automatically benefit if education is properly provided for through the Ministry of Education and other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Much appreciated. There's a man called Stephen Levine who said there once was a youth who thought he could learn everything from books. He read about history and became a historian. He read about mathematics and became a mathematician. He read about English and became an English professor. He read about swimming and he drowned. Some of these things we can only learn through experience. And arts education is one of those. It brings about experiential learning because it is engaging. Everybody that is in the learning room is learning and teaching, including the teacher. So it is about embracing modes of education where we learn from children because they actually can teach us quite a lot. We're now open for questions.
You said that we should try to provide proper arts education. We find ourselves in a situation in our school setup where we, because of linguistic diversity, are teaching learners through the second language as a medium of instruction in the foundation phase of schooling. And there the learners are actually socialized through other cultures. There is a process of acculturation and assimilation of other cultures. And this, I think, impacts on the peculiar and genuine linguistic and cultural heritage in terms of arts with which the learners get to school. How would we be able to provide quality, proper arts education in schools where you have this linguistic and cultural diversity? Because you find a situation where our children who move from what we formerly call as the townships to the urban areas, the environment in which they are taught is Western. If you are talking there about social activities that are organized at those schools, those are Western-based social activities. Actually, we as parents, I am a parent, many a times do not recognize my children because they don't value the art and cultural and linguistic background that they hail from. And if the foundation is also not that sound at home, they completely, totally get lost in school and become other beings. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take the next one?
I've been to many of these kind of talk shows, I can say. I have heard yesterday that this will, on the end of the day of the proceedings, we will reap the fruits and implement and so on and so on. I hope that will happen. But then, the other thing I had like to say is, whoever comes up talks about the music and what, no poetry, oral testimony. And I think it's really very much time that we give also a lot of focus to poetry, especially roots poetry. I will close there because there's so many things to talk about.
Thank you.
Then I just want maybe to start with a recommend to remember Stimela. I think most of you are very familiar about Stimela. It's a song of Huji Masekela. And this is one bring us to the during the 60 to 70 area. There was a movement, it's called a political movement with culture. And then this one, it was connected to Southern Africa. Before independence also, for many African countries, we have no independence. But what I want to say, now we have the lack of the products of the lack of the leadership in art and culture. Now, when we have independence, it's not working. So what do you make out of these products of the leadership in art and culture in Southern Africa? So, and what is really happening, it's a lack of communication. So everybody was saying Stimela from South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, maybe I don't mention all of them. So with art. So I think now there is a paradox of art, leadership, and culture. They are not communicating. They have a facility, everything is there. So you can talk to somebody right now in America and everywhere. But now I don't know what really happened in this communication and connection to that art in SADC. We failed to have a curriculum in the University of SADC, which you learn here in Namibia, you learn it in South Africa, you learn it in Zimbabwe, and elsewhere. And we have two artists I want to mention. Ernest Monakoba from South Africa. He worked in a hard time. And we have Aina, I forgot my book fall down, from Nigeria also. They work in hard time, but they were recognized. We were also having Johnny Mafangeo here in Namibia. They were known because of connection of this political movement during that time, 60 to 70. But now, in this moment, we fail to do something. I think in this aim of this summit is to make something out. Very simple. I listened to your story. You tell us what you've been doing. You didn't tell us your struggle. You're successful. And the one word to engage us in a proper manner that we can do something. Let's do something radical, and then we have a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take Papa as the last one, and then responses, and then we'll look to this side of the room for parity.
Yeah. Is ongaishewe. Ondapandula meme kwa shwe tupe tumara kandoka. Toe. Ndere kishuone kucha tseo mutitamba kongininge katunomba apira.
I would like to thank the mother for having given us this message. It's a very nice and tasty message. However, I do not know how do you receive us, those of us who have no academic qualifications.
Shashi ngere otokunu tango onokaronga kiva evi no shikwao opone ukature mumbuto no mbuto ngo ituramo oto ganja ome akombuto nongo tokusapuishe o mwidindiripo no kuzambo no to ganje hara opo shoka wakunu shimenewo.
I say this because if you plant a seed, you first have to prepare the soil. Having prepared the soil, you then plant your seeds. Then you do the hoeing and weeding. And then some months will go by where you take care of that plant. And then the plant would now have the fruits which you can harvest.
Oshima oshina ingero tatu popi ke humiso jompansi guruakaro. Ndere aleri etu mbaya no kukarando oyo arisi kaepo. Shash only si okara konima utare imunawe kucha oyukapeni.
It is very difficult and wrong to discuss the development in terms of our culture and heritage without the leaders present. Because if the leaders are not present, how will they then lead? As in the African way, if you have to take care of your cattle, you are behind them and not in front of them. And in this case, it is the cattle alone without the herders discussing where to graze.
Nonando hatumu, I'll make it short now. Nonando hatumu atumaraka, aruhera kango tarikafika, arika aratura erumelinika. Tashtishi vulise wali pongwe mwene. Okumana nandichoara erongo italiko mehongere italitara mbaena unongo nunkurungu yavarwao.
Even though sometimes the leaders would have sent a representative, when the representative, however, returns to take a message back, he would have added a bit of his own garlic to it. And it will have a different flavor, rather than when that leader was he himself. Finally, I do not believe that education will be complete as long as we do not recognize those of our society members who have no formal or paper-based education. For there are many who are born with their creator-given gifts who don't need to be taught because they have already been qualified by birth.
Absolutely. Prof, I'd like to take that last one from
And that
Papa.
is me.
Yes, indeed. I would actually like to respond to what you've just said, Papa. First of all, we place a lot of undue merit on academic education. Now there's a very strong recognition of indigenous education. Last night at the dinner, I told the story of Esther Mahlangu, one of our artists who's never seen the inside of a classroom. But I'd like to just give an example of that. Esther Mahlangu was invited and was actually heralded as one of the magicians of the world, because BMW then invited her to go and paint one of their first 525 Eyes series, and now the latest one, the 725i, which is a collector's item edition. She's painted the dashboard. Now, when she went to Germany, people expected to see her with her equipment. They wanted to know where her blueprints, where is the ruler, where is the, those little instruments that you use to do everything. And she uses the eye. How fascinating is that? So you're absolutely right. We're all born with innate God-given abilities to be talented and to teach. It is how we have failed as society to package that education. So we do need to bring in indigenous professors right alongside professors at universities, and it's already happening. So it's about how we begin to actually cross-pollinate this kind of information. Because NAPED conference, there is almost like on a very regular basis, NEPAD conferences on arts education. But I think we do them in particular areas and then they end there. So the hope out of this conference in terms of implementing, the gentleman was saying he hopes that it'll happen in terms of the implementation, is that beyond this, we have to talk as the network of people that have been here and see how are we going to be packaging the information. Nkariko, please stand up. Come. She is currently our coordinator and our contact person, a focal point for Ifaka in terms of the region. The region is Africa. It is how we begin to use the repository of information that we need to design. And capacity is always an issue, so we will welcome volunteers. So thanks, Mkariko. So that we then begin to collate this kind of information and share it. But I have to confirm that we cannot be successful without making sure that our indigenous knowledge and indigenous professors, regardless of whether they have the academic background or not, are part and parcel of our education. That's where we went wrong. Okay, so I'll take that one. Prof, you can take the rest.
Very quickly, the first one, arts education, and it is being taught in English, but what happens to the indigenous languages? I think it is a mistake to seek answers outside. I think the people who teach art at school level, at schools, they have to understand how they can teach not using English. I'm working on another project, and this is I'm collecting cultural artifacts from indigenous languages. And my belief and my contention is that I'm not going to translate them into English for the consumption of people outside. I want to preserve them in the local form, because I think it is necessary to ensure that the local form exists in its pristine quality. So therefore, when you say that arts education and it has to be taught in English, why are you seeking for answers outside? Why don't you look for answers within? Okay, so that's my answer. The second question was about poetry. I don't believe that. I must tell you this, okay, this is a confession. When I came here to Namibia in 2003, I asked people, I said, where's Namibian literature? Tell me about Namibian literature. Because I come from a tradition where we have literature in 26 different languages, much, much older than British English literature. So I said, where's Namibian literature? And people said, no, there's no Namibian literature. And I couldn't believe it. I said, no, there must be. There's a lot of poetry. It's unbelievable. People come to me with their poetry publications. Even yesterday, Bilavar came to me with his latest anthology of poetry. There's a lot of poetry in society. If you look at my book, I brought out a book called Writing Namibia, Literature and Transition. And in that, I've got a chapter on poetry. And I look at landscape in Namibian poetry. And I've done analysis of Namibian poetry. And I've looked at the metaphors that are used by Namibians. And these are all unpublished and published poems. So I don't believe that there is no poetry. There's a lot of literature. We just don't think that it is literature. What was very interesting for this poetry anthology that was brought to me yesterday by Bilavar was the fact that he had his poems in English, but next to it, he had his poems in Oshihirero. And that to me is more valuable. You know, the fact that you have both. I won't be able to read Oshihirero because I don't know Herero. I don't know any of the Oshiwambo languages. So for me, it's to understand this culture, it's nice to read those poems in English. But I think at the same time, we need to preserve those poems in the original languages. And that is not what we are doing. That's what we are losing sight of. That's why I said decolonize. That's my agenda. Decolonize. We should go back to our own languages. We should write in our own languages. That's the second, my response to the second question. Third, leadership in art and culture. I'm afraid I cannot answer this because I'm not the one who's organized this. Leadership, I agree. The leadership should be present, but I have no control over that. So I'm sorry. I think an important point that you made was communication, art, leadership, and culture. I'd like to say that I am in the Department of Communication, but I'm a professor of English. Communication is important, and communication happens at all levels in different forms. And I think you made a very valid point that art, leadership, and culture are not communicating with each other, and therefore there is a gap. And again, this is something that has to be addressed. It's a very important point that you've raised. I take note of that. And of course, the third question is...
Take other questions?
Fourth question has
Yeah.
already been addressed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Well, but what I wanted to say, Papa, is that, you know, we may be saying leadership is not in this room, and maybe they're not in the room, but let's recognize the fact that it's the leadership that put money into this initiative, into the Arts Summit itself. And last night we were with the Deputy President, you were there. And Patrick, I don't know where Patrick is. I trust Patrick implicitly. I really trust that Patrick would be able to package the information here and make sure things happen. So you can also hold me accountable to hold Patrick accountable. So what I'm saying is, you know, and it's true that they do a lot of things, but let's recognize that. Okay, this side of the room, please.
I would like to say that we should not make the same mistakes that the education sector is going through. That we are saying arts must be part of the curriculum, which is a very good thing, and I agree with that. But then we started with education, certain things that we implemented, life skills, and we are giving to any teacher whose package is not full. And now we are giving, for example, grade 1 foundation level to grade 10 failures or grade 12 failures to teach those learners how to read, how to write, and then it leads to a lot of failure because the foundation is not properly placed. So what I would like to request is with this art education that proper surveys, proper research should be done. Money be set aside that the right people should be in the chair of arts. Right people should teach arts at school. That is all I would want to contribute. Thank you.
Absolutely well said. Ma'am?
I really agree with the previous statement about a specialized teacher for a specialized subject. I really believe that every school should have an arts teacher and a music teacher and a drama teacher and a dance teacher. If we can have all of that, that would be wonderful. So my question is really, how are we going to populate schools with these teachers? It takes years to come at a professional level, whether you have the academic qualification or the practical experience, it takes years to become a professional teacher. So how are we going to train these teachers? Where are we going to train them? And is it perhaps a good idea to get some help from the region, to get in some teachers that are qualified in the other countries, neighboring countries? How should we address that issue?
Okay, can we take a third question and then a fourth? But, you know, we also, in between, can I just quickly, because artists in schools, remember that you also have artists that may not have the pedagogical background, and you can pair them with teachers that have the pedagogical background, and then you can have education going from both an experiential side and from a pedagogical side. So what I'm saying is there are many ways of innovating so that we don't follow the stream of just what we used to academically.
I come from West Africa, I'm from Gambia, and we have an issue where there is not really a structure all the time for formal education. So I'm very much an advocate for accessible and revolutionary education that's free. I personally run a free education center for environmentalism and arts and culture, offering teaching in indigenous languages, and we just do like a bunch of different things. So my question is, how can we make this art education more accessible for places where children can't go to school, girls can't go to school because they have their periods and don't have access to menstrual products, stuff like this. So how can we make this art education more accessible?
My question really it's on language itself. What I'm thinking now here, last week, Wednesday, because of the SADC summit, there was another summit, a People's Summit. I was part of that summit. What I observed is some delegate from Mozambique, when they went on stage, their problem was, in Mozambique, they can't speak any other language apart from Portuguese. Now, you remember what Patrick said with that quote when he started. Now, this is the same thing that we are doing with our own education. I have observed to be seen as educated, liberal, you must speak English. That's what screws up our mind. So I seriously don't understand how we can sustain African culture, African tradition in this modern society if we don't promote our own language at the center of development that we are talking. So for me, that's something that we need to think how we can position ourselves. Otherwise, we remain at the periphery of society. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Please answer, Prof.
Actually, there were 4 questions, but I think of the 4 questions, a couple of questions were actually comments. And I'd like to thank the first speaker who raised a very important point about art education and the fact that teachers have to be equipped. How do you ensure the teacher? I think placing too much of importance on an academic qualification is going to be detrimental to arts. I think the talent and the experience should count for more. And I think one of the suggestions which Rosemary made, is it okay to call you Rosemary? Yeah, Rosemary made is to bring 2 people together, so that the pedagogy, we find this because we have vocational training, at Namibia University of Science and Technology, where we train the trainers. So there are very creative and innovative ways of doing this. You can bring artists to a workshop and then train them in the pedagogy of, training of teaching children. So that's one of the ways of doing it. Yes, I agree, arts education should be made accessible. I think there should not be an overemphasis on using, first of all, the westernized art forms, and secondly, using westernized art materials. And I'll just give you an example from India, because what happens is, in India, if you go to the most remote villages, you will see in front of every house, there is a little design that is made. It's a part of our culture. What people do is they clean the yard, the front of the house. The poorest people who can't even afford to have maybe 2 meals a day. The poorest, what they will do is they clean the yard and they'll make a tiny design. That's art. Where do they learn it from? They don't learn it from anybody. They just see each other and do it. And of course, these designs are made out of rice flour. So it's very cheap. Creativity is right there, and they're using indigenous local material. Why do we think that you can be an artist only if you use oil paints or pastels or whatever, or felt pens? You can use any kind of material. I have my colleague sitting there who was telling me that local materials are being used. The sculptor who was telling me local material should be used, and that's one of the things that he's doing with his teaching, how to use local materials. And when you use local materials, you look at world differently. You don't look at something as waste. You look at waste as something beautiful, and this is what we should be doing. This is what we should be encouraging. The last question, English versus indigenous languages. I 100% support that. I am an English professor, but I have come through English into indigenous languages. I've come through English into my own language, into my own culture. I think this is why I said decolonize. I think yes, I understand, there's this constant debate between should we promote English or should we promote indigenous languages? And we need to promote English because we need to connect with the world. English is a library language. Through English, we get access to technology, to science, to education, etc., etc., etc. There is no, gainsaying the fact that English is important. But English should not be promoted at the neglect of indigenous languages. Indigenous languages need to be promoted as well. And that's a part of one of the projects that I'm working on. I'm going around the regions, collecting the most endangered of Namibian languages, even though I don't speak them.
If this is the Arts Summit, don't force us to ask questions alone. Because that it presupposes that the people that you bring there are intellectual gladiators with all, the answers, and let us have a beautiful exchange. Most of the stuff that I was going to say were taken by my brother, Tate Shikongeni, that art is something above intelligence, like your everyday packaged intelligence. It's spirit. And the worst thing that you can do to an artist is to build those crawls that you call, places of higher learning or stuff like that. The most evil thing that you can do to an artist is to attempt to educate an artist. Artists are born.
I hope you're feeling better. Thank you very much for expressing yourself. And please, there are no gladiators here.